All right, I'd like to call to order the October 13, 2025 Mountlake Terrace Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please take the roll?
Chair Batista,
Here.
Commissioner Stenson,
Present.
Commissioner Thompson, I do see her present, although she is not able to currently answer. Commissioner Landis,
Here.
Commissioner Wu.
Present.
Currently, as of roll call, Vice Chair Betcher and Commissioner Morgan are currently absent.
All right. Item number 3, approval of the September 22nd, 2025 meeting minutes. Does anybody have any changes or corrections to those? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so we will go ahead and declare those accepted as presented. Item number 4, public comment. Let the record show there is no public comment in person. Did we have anybody who submitted anything or signed up to speak for public comment tonight?
No one has signed up online or virtually.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, presentation of the draft critical area ordinance.
All right. Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Pizzo. I'm the senior planner here at the city and have been working on our critical area ordinance update. So looking forward to sharing with you the draft today. See if I can, okay. So yes, the purpose this evening will be to review code changes, more specifically, gather your questions, any concerns, and discuss the next steps. I'll start with some council goals, how those relate to this work, provide a subject summary, then get into the nitty-gritty details, provide a timeline, and answer any questions you have. So this relates to City Council goals around environmental sustainability and resiliency, as I mentioned in our overview back in July. And we update our critical area ordinance to comply with state regulations. The Growth Management Act requires cities and counties to adopt regulations for development that will protect our critical areas. And so doing so will also align with our comprehensive plan environmental element, and we need to adopt changes by the end of this year. And there's 5 types of critical areas as a refresher that we are required to regulate. So those are wetlands, areas with critical recharging effect on aquifers used for potable water, frequently flooded areas, geologically hazardous areas, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. And we also do this work because it can be costly or even impossible to replace critical area functions and values once they are lost. So our critical area map, which is really a living document, still a work in progress, to show where critical areas may be located within the city and where we require more extensive study. If there is a proposal on a site that has a mapped critical area, we require further technical reports. And so this just gives us a good indication of where we need to require that and where regulations most likely apply. So getting into some general provision updates, the first 2 are applicability section. So we're proposing updating the area to which the regulations apply from within 200 feet to 300 feet of a stream, wetland, or water body, and adding in within a channel migration zone or ordinary high water mark that's not otherwise regulated by our shoreline provisions. And this is to be consistent with the Growth Management Act requirements. Also in applicability, we currently do not have anything related to critical aquifer recharge areas, And so we're adding in a distance equal to or less than 200 feet from a critical aquifer recharge area, also known as a CARA. And that again is to be consistent with GMA requirements. And then for exempt activities, we do have some language about exemptions if they are, if there's a functionally isolated wetland or stream buffer. So we're providing some minor changes to that to clarify what that means, what would count, what wouldn't count. For example, if you had a large development in the middle of a buffer that would maybe cut off the function or value it would provide, that would be an acceptable isolation of that buffer. And I can get into more details as questions come up. Another exempt activity we are modifying is, currently it says that the location, dimensions, and size of a critical area buffer cannot be changed, but we're changing this language to just say that there can't be a net ecological loss, because the current language might unintentionally limit someone from increasing a buffer or critical area. And so we don't want to accidentally deter restoration efforts. So yeah, if it provides a net ecological gain, then those activities are allowed. Within the trees and vegetation maintenance exemption section, currently, we don't have anything in that section that says that maintenance is allowed or emergency tree removal, though it is later in the trees and vegetation section of the critical area code, but we wanted to mention this earlier in the code so it's consistent with that section down below. So just to provide some clarity based on what staff has noticed implementing the code. And then another exempt activity, so we do have an exemption about hazard trees, which makes sense, but it only refers to tree removals. And there's also some vague language about getting documentation from a qualified professional. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife recommended that we still prioritize having the tree converted to a snag and protecting nearby trees and vegetation, as well as specifying that an arborist is the right qualified professional to provide that documentation. So just a small kind of good clarifying tweak there. The next exempt activity talks about activities in an improved right-of-way, and there currently aren't requirements to buffer around the right-of-way, replant with native vegetation or retain native vegetation, so this will add a requirement to do those things, and that's the best practice that was recommended by Facet, the consultant we've been working really closely with on our ordinance update. And then we don't really have any non-conformance critical area specific code language, and so we recommend adding that in as a new section. And in that section, we will allow legal uses in existing structures that were in existence on the effective date of the new ordinance that don't meet buffering or building setbacks as legal non-conforming. Legal non-conforming status will also apply to applications that vested before the date of the ordinance adoption. Also, legal non-conforming uses and structures can be maintained or repaired as long as the impervious area or structural footprint are not increased. And then legal non-conforming structures that are damaged or destroyed in a fire and things like that can be restored or resumed unless they were abandoned for 6 continuous months. And then a note about lawns. They can be mown and maintained, but not expanded into buffers or critical areas because we really want that to be full of native plants. And then non-native vegetation can be maintained, but similarly not expanded into buffers or critical areas. Some more general provisions. So under our trees and vegetation, activities and standards section, we currently similarly don't allow for altering location, dimension, or size of the critical area or buffer. We require that all noxious weeds and invasive plants are removed by hand. We don't have a timeline for if someone clears noxious weeds and invasive plants when they need to replant with native vegetation to stabilize the soil. And then we have provisions for hazard trees that are within our section about healthy trees. So we're proposing removing restrictions similar to what I just spoke about, demonstrating net ecological gain. We do not want to limit the types of tools that can be used because Fish and Wildlife says there's a lot of really effective invasive plant removal that happens outside of hand tools. And so we don't want to limit the restoration efforts. We are adding that plants need to be, or an area that's cleared of invasives needs to be replanted within 30 days to tighten up that timeline kind of loophole. And then hazard trees, just reorganizing that into the hazard tree section, keeping healthy trees in healthy tree section for clarity. And then preliminary assessment for critical area review. Right now there's 4 different options that staff can make a determination on a preliminary assessment. The last 2 options are really similar to each other, and I'm not sure that staff would have the expertise to make the determination. So we want to simplify this into 3, where there may be a critical, or where there isn't a critical area, there may be a critical area that's impacted or not impacted. And so just simplifying this for implementation. And then critical area reports, the mitigation language right now is focused on preventing and mitigating impacts to critical areas. We want to strengthen this language and make sure that the applicants demonstrate that they have first avoided the impact altogether and consider that as an option. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife recommended this to make sure we're following best available science. And then the mitigation preferred sequencing and location, the title itself could be interpreted to be understood as that mitigation is optional. So we want to remove the word preferred because it's not optional. And the first step is, like I said, to avoid the impact altogether. Also, compensatory mitigation is only allowed where critical area functions and values can be replaced, and mitigation is not allowed in CARAs, so the critical aquifer recharge area, and then we're adding a monitoring requirement there as well. Signs and fencing, so right now it's all text-based what our requirements are. So we're proposing adding some images and a fence standard detail so that there's uniformity across the city where we have critical areas. And then variances, right now we have some, I'm calling it weak code language that allows for deviations from development standards, allowed uses, exceptions, and exemptions. There's also some confusion with reasonable use exception language in our variance code. So I'm proposing strengthening that language to align with best available science. And again, that kind of looks like making sure that they've really considered not having an impact at all as the first step. And that's to be consistent with best available science. The city could also consider removing the variance section from the critical area code. This was something that our consultants brought up. Staff felt like we should keep it but strengthen it. So that could be an item of conversation if you all feelings about that. Wetlands, so I'm going to get into the wetland specific regulation updates. Again, this is our map on the left showing where wetlands are located within the city and some images of what wetlands look like on the right. So our first update is to add some ecology recommended language that buffers must be vegetated with native plants appropriate to the ecoregion And if this is not the case, buffers must be planted accordingly or widened to ensure buffer functions are provided. We're also proposing updating the buffer widths for wetlands, specifically for standard buffers that don't have minimization measures and a low habitat score. So this will look like an increase of 25 or 20 feet, depending on the wetland category, except for category 4, which these are the most disturbed wetlands, without taking away the buffer, actually. And then we're requiring an increased buffer width for all wetland buffers by 50% where there are slopes greater than 30%, and this is in alignment with ecology's guidance. And then having allowances for buffer widths to be removed, or width reductions. So right now we allow width reductions, but that's not supported by best available science or ecology. Proposed updates, some more proposed updates for wetlands. So adding some new conditions section so that we have more specific implementation language, including wetlands with a habitat score of 6 or more have to have a habitat corridor protection of 100 additional feet to connect wetlands with other valuable habitats. I will say this is more applicable for larger rural jurisdictions, which might be why our code doesn't currently get down to this level. I think what's more applicable and we'll be specifying in the code is wetlands with 5 or less habitat scores, needing only the mitigation measures that are listed in the specific table within the code already. And then building setbacks from wetland buffers, we propose allowing uncovered decks in the wetland building setback area. This is to be consistent with other code language within the critical area code that says if you need a building permit, it shouldn't be in the building setback area. So that would mean that we're only allowing buildings with overhangs up to 2 feet and impervious surfaces in that building setback area. And stormwater regulations will still apply to those impervious surfaces. And then exemptions for legally non-conforming buffers with their conditions. So if there's a development and at the time the buffer was a certain width and that was approved and it's on the plat, we're going to honor that moving forward. Some more general updates. So we're tightening up our regulations so that any alteration to a wetland is only allowed through a variance or reasonable use exception process rather than an administrative approval process. So only a hearing examiner would be able to make that determination. And when they do allow an alteration, compensatory mitigation is required. Our ratios for mitigation have been updated to match ecology guidance and provide a mitigation method preference, as well as some definitions. And the hearing examiner may consider alternative types of mitigation and resource trade-offs, and also are based on best available science. And we're also adding the credit debit method as a mitigation option. So the next critical area section is fish and wildlife conservation areas. This is a map showing where they're located on the left, and as well as our streams. So the blue line, dotted line, is our fish-bearing streams. The purple line is our non-fish-bearing streams. So in general, we're moving the stream section into the fish and wildlife habitat conservation section. We're updating the definition of fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. We're updating our classifications to be consistent with state code and to ensure consistent implementation is practical. So removing primary and secondary habitat areas to only one category so that we can better implement the code. We're adding language to retain city authority to determine buffers. we're adding a provision to exempt functionally disconnected buffers. Alterations will not be permitted in these areas without reasonable use exemption and/or a variance. Mitigation plans should be implemented before the area is disturbed or immediately after, and time to reduce any impacts to flora and fauna. And then maintenance and monitoring is now required for this type of critical area. Okay, so streams. There's two different approaches that jurisdictions are considering related to streams, including Mountlake Terrace. So the first system is the water typing system from the Department of Natural Resources, and this is the system we currently have. So it's based on fish volume, fish use, accessibility, seasonality, and presence of salmonids. I'm going to take a drink. All right. The second option is site potential tree height and riparian management zones. And this is new language and methods from Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in this method, all streams are equal importance and protection is based on the soil type and the dominant tree species in the area. So staff looked at 4 different options with the consultants and our GIS specialists on our stream buffers. So we could retain what we currently have, which is 100 feet for type F, 50 feet for non-fish perennial streams, and then non-fish seasonal streams is based on a technical study, and our building setbacks are 15 feet. A minor change would be increasing type F to 125 feet and increasing both of the type N streams to 75 feet and reducing the building setback by 10 feet. The next kind of intense option would be increasing type F to 150 feet and increasing both of the type N streams to 100 feet and having a building setback of 10 feet. And then the major change would be this full site potential tree height model, where all streams are a minimum of 102 feet and a maximum of 231 feet. So the first option to retain our existing stream buffers is familiar and predictable, minimal change, and perhaps easier to implement, but the cons are it's not consistent with guidance from Department of Fish and Wildlife. It doesn't protect stream functions very well, falls short of our ecological function targets. The minor change option does improve habitat function for type N streams. It moves us in a closer direction to the best available science compliance, and it would be a moderate impact for development. But it's still below site potential tree height average of 173 foot buffers. It may underprotect high site potential tree height corridors and then impacts 340 parcels. The moderate change option would be 150 feet for type F, 100 feet for type N, and these would have a high ecological function across all stream types. It closely aligns with site potential tree height averages and retains stream classification distinctions, and so it's familiar in that way. It would impact 354 parcels. And then the major change option, full site potential tree height, would fully align with best available science, has the highest ecological benefit, and targets function by site, so very site specific. The cons are that it would require extensive mapping and review. It would impact 412 parcels. It would limit our infill and redevelopment that's mandated by Puget Sound Regional Council under the GMA. And there's 17 parcels that wouldn't be regulated that are regulated now. So staff is recommending option 1, which was the moderate change. We did receive a letter from Fish and Wildlife in support of this option. It meets their minimum requirements. So the table would be updated so that we're taking shoreline, we're referencing shoreline to the shoreline regulations because they shouldn't really be regulated through critical areas. So we're moving that to shoreline, and then type F, our fish-bearing streams would be increased by 50 feet for 150-foot buffers and a building setback of 10 feet. So we're trying to kind of lessen the impact by reducing the building setback where it's still like, it would still allow for someone to put a scaffolding up if they're repairing their house or something like that, but not the full 15 feet so that they have more room for building. And then our type N streams, increasing those both to 100 feet with a 10-foot building setback. And this is aligned with Fish and Wildlife, which says you need at least 100 feet from a stream to prevent pollution from entering the stream. So that's why they were on board with this. It's more familiar with how we currently do stream buffers, and so staff is recommending this option. Some more updates, so allowing overhangs and impervious surface in our wetland buffers to be consistent with what we do, or sorry, stream buffers to be consistent with what we do with wetlands, improving how to identify the stream buffer edge. There's some language about the channel migration zone is how we would do that, or if you didn't have that information, ordinary high water mark, and if you didn't have that information, stream bank, the top of the stream bank. Requiring stream buffers to be vegetated with native plants from the ecoregion, replanted with those, or buffer width should be increased. We're adding exemptions for functionally isolated buffers, exemptions for legally non-conforming buffers with conditions, requiring enhancement measures for redevelopment or development site that has a stream buffer. Currently, we have those in our code, but they're all optional. So broken them down into some that are required and some that will remain optional. And then buffer averaging for streams is no longer going to be allowed per Fish and Wildlife's recommendation and science to prevent net loss of ecological function. And then lastly, removing provisions, whoops. Okay, I'll just pause.
Did we all get booted, or are we offline? Okay.
It just happened, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not affected.
Oh, so we're still on. We're still live then. Maybe.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Looks like we're back.
Okay.
I think it's back now. I see you.
Perfect. Lastly, removing the provision that allows buffer reductions for commercial development based on economic viability. Okay, geological hazards. This is where these are located in the city. The darker the color, as in the more red, pink, are our highest or steepest, highest level of hazard, steepest slopes. So in this section, we'll be updating our classification definitions. We'll be updating our landslide hazard susceptibility factors to be consistent with state code, adding a slope delineation diagram to help with implementation of slope calculations, and we're going to be requiring a cumulative impact assessment as part of the hazard analysis within the critical area report. Frequently flooded areas, these are the turquoise areas on the map. And just a few updates, so requiring a habitat assessment for projects within the floodplains to understand any effects on federally listed endangered species, and that is to comply with FEMA. Flood storage volumes are not allowed to be decreased by a project, and flood-based elevation shall not be increased by a project. And I'll be going over specific floodplain management updates in a presentation after this. Our critical aquifer recharge areas are shown on the map on the left. So there's the Olympic View wellhead protection area in yellow. It's mostly in Edmonds, but there is an additional protection area that extends from that within Mountlake Terrace. And then there's aquifer sensitivity mapped on the western side of the city, mostly around Lake Ballinger. So we're looking to update the classification based on susceptibility instead of significance. We're including the wellhead protection areas as a type of CARA. We're adding them to the critical area map, as previously there were none mapped. We're listing types of uses that are regulated and prohibited in CARAs. These are mostly heavy kind of uses, cemeteries, dry cleaners, auto uses, things like that. Updating standards and criteria for the alteration or development of CARAs. And we are updating what we require in a critical area report. It must be a hydrogeologic report required. We're requiring that, and that it's done by a geologist with a license in hydrogeology. Because right now it just says that it would be a geologist and a geologic report, but received feedback from Department of Health that it needs to be a hydrogeologic. And then requiring reports to include wellhead protection information where those are present. And then our mitigation planning section is removed as compensatory mitigation is not available for CARAs because essentially there's no degree of degrading an aquifer for drinking water is acceptable. And then within our definition section, we're looking to remove terms that are no longer in our ordinance. We'll be adding some new words and phrases that are in the ordinance as we propose, and then updating existing definitions to meet best available science per state law, or just provide better clarity for staff implementation. All right, so that was a lot of information. I'm happy to take any questions you all have.
This is a lot and quite dense.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of questions about, I think it's the wetland buffer. It looks like there's a significant increase, and it looks like it increases further when there is a steep slope involved. Are they basically saying that the wetland at the bottom of the cliff, like the stuff at the top of the cliff, impacts it more?
Where slopes greater than 30% exist. So this is when there are no minimization measures, which I can go over what those are. But yes, everywhere where there's slopes, I believe that guidance is to acknowledge how the different critical areas on top of each other can impact each other. I could get more specific information and bring it next time as to where that's coming from, but I think when you have slopes, the runoff is probably, I don't know, I'm thinking of like rain events and slopes and runoffs bringing pollutants into the wetland, just, I don't know, things like that. But I can find out more if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, I think this is information that I think would be helpful. I know you've shown maps of like the current critical areas. I don't know how easy it is to generate maps that show the change in these buffers and then also the change in impacted properties. But I know last time we reviewed this, you pointed out that there was a potential problem with the stream buffers that interfered with town center because they decided to build the train station not only next to the freeway and the golf course, but also a fish-bearing stream. So it sounds like this issue you've worked out is compromise that sort of preserves some of the viability of town center.
Yeah, so we also realized that we had given Facet an inaccurate shapefile for streams, where before the stream was rerouted, it went through town center more than it does now. So with the accurate non-fish-bearing stream, it's the McAller Creek. With that in the right location, because it was diverted, it was less impactful on town center than we had originally thought. So that was good news, kind of separate from the option.
That's a relief.
Yeah, but still to make sure we meet the best available science for kind of pollutants getting into a stream, whether there's fish or not. That minimum 100 feet is really what Fish and Wildlife wanted to see. So that's kind of how we landed on that.
And the topography doesn't really matter so much, like the top of the hill, bottom of the hill doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah, streams didn't really have a slope, then the buffer increases. Guidance. Our wetland guidance comes from Department of Ecology, and our Fish and Wildlife guidance comes from the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they're two different departments that come out with their own kind of guiding science documents. So I'm not sure why slopes for wetlands, but streams, there isn't the same thing for streams, but I could ask that question.
Okay, I think it's probably, I don't know, I guess it'd be more for my own notification, so maybe it's not that important. But I'm just trying to understand, when we're looking at citing things like neighborhood centers or whatnot, and these changes that the state is requesting, how that's kind of impacting our understanding of the lay of the land we have here.
Yeah, so I will point out, again, the non-conforming section. So if we do already have development or impervious surface, like, I don't know, a parking lot, for example, we can build vertically. We just can't encroach more because that legally exists. So because a lot of Mountlake Terrace is already developed, some of these things will apply under the non-conforming code and not be as impacted as, a jurisdiction that has a lot of undeveloped vacant land.
Okay, so we can still build our 12-story block houses, and that's how we can, well, I guess if there's this is kind of where I think it'd be interesting if you've done an analysis of how this is impacting our
Yeah, we did do an analysis on the stream buffers for how many parcels and how many square feet are impacted by the different options. So currently 223 parcels are impacted, and what we're proposing would bring it up to 354 parcels impacted. What I haven't done is subtracted the impervious area out of that. So that could be the next step if you'd like to see that, is how many square feet of this is already developed and therefore is not newly impacted.
Yeah, and I guess then the big question is, for the stuff we're still kind of redeveloping, especially the neighborhood centers, are there any highlights we should be aware of? So it looks like the southeast corner of town, where all those apartments are, also has the highest geological hazard, which is great. thing to discover. But if there are any like changes to the critical areas that we need to keep in mind as we're moving forward, I think that would be really helpful information to kind of see how that works.
Yeah, maybe I can ask Paul, our GIS specialist, if they can overlay the critical area map with the zoning map or comp plan map, so we can see those kind of next to each other. A lot of our critical areas are in our parks, which is kind of a blessing. So that's good. But yes, I think you're right that there are hazards in what's now the freeway tourist. We're going to be the gateway mixed use area, and then up along the employment or currently LIOP district. And then where the Talliswood apartments are, but that's already developed too. So it might be helpful to know if you'd like to see like where the impervious, how much of it is already developed with impervious surface, and also where the zoning map falls on the critical area map.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think-
that was going to be my comment. I'd like to see a map of each of the options in, where the impacts, lie, especially, I understand staff's recommending, the moderate change option 1. And there is, a good jump in parcels when you go to the major change. And I'm just kind of curious of where those parcels actually are.
Yeah.
How that would potentially affect the type of development that we're trying to encourage.
Yes, I actually think we do in one of the the memos in the back of the packet, but I can put it in the slide for next time.
Okay.
Yeah, Facet did an analysis showing which parcels are affected and by how much by the site potential tree height, and then Paul did it for our stream buffer increase option. So I do have those. They might be in the back of that book.
Okay.
But I can put it in the slide for next time and make sure to go over that.
I have one more question about aquifer recharge areas.
Yes.
Is it all in the parks, or do we have some areas that are developable? And I know, I feel like I've heard a lot more about the Olympic View Water Management Authority kind of complaining a lot more about redevelopment in Esperance and Edmonds about some of these things. Have we been getting any guff from them on some of our development regulations?
No, I haven't really heard anything from them other than that they would like us to include this area on our map. It does affect a few parcels, but it's not a lot compared to Edmonds, which has 2 separate wellhead protection areas with, they're broken down by like 6-month travel rate, 1-year travel, 5-year travel, and then 10-year travel. We only have, and then they protect beyond the 10-year, which is specific to them. Not every wellhead protection kind of area does that, from what I understand. But only the buffer of the 10-year, and maybe, yeah, I think it's just the buffer of the 10-year that is within Mountlake Terrace. So it's not as high of a susceptibility area as they have in Edmonds, where they have the whole spectrum. So I haven't heard anything about our development, but just working with them to make sure we get this on our map and we have regulations that they would support, which actually modeled our regulations off of Edmonds code, thinking, okay, however they regulate that, we should be consistent since we kind of share a wellhead protection area. So.
Yeah, and I see that it's a little bit close to some of our industrial areas. Is that a potential conflict we should be aware of?
I think that's good to be aware of. But with our legal non-conforming, or our non-conforming code, they'd be able to continue to exist, but we can't, increased risk of contaminating those areas. So if there was a redevelopment going in, you know, these regulations would apply now in ways that they hadn't applied before. So just something to keep in mind. Yeah, in that area.
Yeah, it's a little difficult for me to see at this scale of map, but I think, you know, the sort of industrial development kind of down in the valley off of 220th looks like it might potentially be a conflict. And so that's something we might want to get ahead of there in terms of determining mitigation or being aware of business development opportunities.
Okay. Any other questions or things you'd like more information on next time?
Just checking to see if any of our online commissioners have any questions.
Yeah, I had a quick question about just the concept of net ecological gain. Saw that referenced a couple times. So just looking for some guidance on the administration of like determination of net ecological gain and what that means and how it would be evaluated.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our critical area code, we have the applicability section. So if you are near or within any of these map critical areas or they're observed on site, the regulations would apply. And so staff would start with a preliminary assessment requirement. So requiring the applicant of a property to at least minimum fill out a preliminary assessment with their observations of what they see on their site. And staff would go out and say, yes, I see this too, and it looks like what you want to do will impact this area. And then we would require a more technical report by, you know, a wetland biologist or a geotechnical engineer or a hydrogeologist, depending on the type of critical area. And then staff would really rely on that expert's expertise of the site and how what they're going to do is going to or not going to impact the critical area. And there's a whole set of criteria that has to be met within a critical area report. And so through that report, they would have to show that there's no net loss of ecological functions or values. So if the function is to, like a wetland provides habitat, it helps purify the water, things like that, and, you know, contributes to water quality, they would have to show that what they're doing, that they're avoiding all impacts, or if they are having an impact, how they're going to mitigate it so that when the project's done, it's still as robust of a habitat, it's still providing water quality benefits and values. So, yeah, we're kind of relying on that technical expertise to demonstrate to us that, you know, it will be just as good of a resource and function just as well after the proposed project.
Got it. That makes sense. Thanks.
Yep. And the code also says that the city can hire a third-party review. So if we ever felt like we didn't have the expertise to kind of make that determination based on their report, we can also hire someone who is of that qualification as well to review a plan. So, yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
Hi, I have a quick question. Just a little bit more for kind of my curiosity and knowledge. I know that a lot of mitigation plans and code requirements require like monitoring over many years. And so I'm just wondering about kind of MLT's process for tracking that over time and like through staff turnover and so forth. If you could just give a little background on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. I think that's Yeah, a good question, and I feel like we could probably improve the like formal process of it. I feel like it's a work in progress, but right now, if folks are required to do a monitoring plan, we've switched permitting software too, but right now I'm just getting like emails that's like, okay, we've submitted this year's report of this area and how many plants survived, et cetera, and it goes in the address file, and our inspectors are good at reminding folks, when those are due, and our planners as well. So I do see that it's happening, and then we got a new software system, and so we can put notes and reminders that this report is due. And so internally, we're getting more systematic, I would say, on how we're reminding ourselves that we need to make sure these things are being submitted and saved and followed up on. So it is happening. I think it's improving. I think there's still room to improve that as well. But yeah, good question.
Thanks, Sarah. I think just with seeing an increase in requirements, is there any consideration being given to more of a strain being put on staff and just the, bigger buffers, more monitoring reports, more critical areas reviews? I can just see kind of a ripple effect through the impact on the planning staff. Has there been any discussions around supporting staff support with the update of this ordinance?
That's a good question too. I think with the regulations themselves, larger buffers, we're still reviewing the plans that have a critical area. I guess if the buffer is bigger or the applicability area is bigger, then yes, we're going to have more. If we're regulating more of the city, then there's going to be more critical area kind of permits coming through. So that is definitely a possibility. I don't know that we've talked about it specifically. Yeah, it's kind of the tension of, we're required to protect these areas, and we should protect these areas, and we have to stay up to date with the science as it's evolving. And we have the same level of staff as we did before, so it's a good question and something we could talk more about. But I think with our new software, we're really trying to streamline and make it easier for applicants to know kind of what we need from them. It's not really solves all staffing question, but yeah, I don't know. That's not really a great answer. Kind of all over the place. But
It's okay. I understand if you're not prepared to answer that right now. But yeah, something to consider, just seeing this extensive of an update. And I'm sure that, right now, MLT might not have the in-house expertise for a lot of this stuff, but it's like, right, we're regulating more of the city. We're going to be seeing more applications. When does paying for third-party reviews start to outweigh just hiring an in-house staff person to support this? So totally understand if you're not ready to answer that. Just something to consider as we go through this process.
thank you.
Kind of to build on that, do we have a sense of, it's a state requirement, so I don't think we have much leeway here, but do we have a sense of how much review burden this is adding both to staff and also to the people who might be trying to build in the city? Like, it's a significant update, but is it a lot? Do you have a sense of it's a lot of difference?
I feel like it's similar. I mean, like, there's still the 5 critical areas. We moved streams into fish and wildlife. There are some increases in buffers, but we also are pretty developed cities, so there will also be a lot of non-conforming that comes into play. And I think we wanted to put that in the critical area section to make sure that there wasn't confusion about that for existing development. So I do think there will be some increase. I don't know that I have a clear sense of how substantial it will be. Again, too, because a lot of our critical areas are within our parks. That kind of helps, because that kind of goes hand in hand sometimes. Not as much development pressure, right? So that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm optimistic, but I think, yeah, there are some folks that maybe weren't in a critical area before, or, wasn't mapped or wasn't close enough to a critical area that now are going to have to get at least a preliminary assessment, if not a full-blown report. So it will be a little bit more for them than what they had previously been used to. But for folks that have always kind of had critical area on their property, it won't really change for them, except for in terms of like applying to for permits, but in terms of maybe where the boundary is with where they can do things or not, that will be increased a little bit. So yeah, does that answer your question?
I think so. And I think seeing the map where we have the impacted areas that are different than what we had before might help as well.
Comparing what we have now to what we would have. This is kind of in transition. This shows some areas that are not on our existing, or not. This has been somewhat updated since our last critical area update. Like shows the CARAs where we didn't show CARAs at all before. The geohazards haven't really changed. The wetland areas as shown haven't changed. So yeah, I could try to provide a before and what we know now. Yeah, I could do that. I don't know at this scale that you'll really see how much of a it depends on the type of critical area. So like for the streams, I know we definitely have that, and you can kind of see it taking up more space. So I'll be sure to include that next time. And then the CARAs, that's brand new. So
yeah, I
we'll
think
monitor that.
yeah, I think the two areas that I'm most concerned about are sort of the potential overlap of like, especially with the CARA, the new kind of, if that impacts our industrial areas, because that sounds like a potential conflict that we might not be aware of. And then the impact to some of the more dense zones we've got, if there are any conflicts there.
What was the second one? Sorry.
Oh, the impact of some of the more like neighborhood center type zones, or
Okay.
R4 town center, if there are impacts in those areas.
Okay. Yeah, I can bring a zoning map with the critical areas on top for next time.
Cool.
Okay, anybody else? All right, just double checking with staff, that's it for this
Yes.
specific ordinance?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to item number 6, the presentation of the draft floodplain management ordinance.
All right, so now I'll go over our floodplain management ordinance update. Similarly, going to review more specific code changes and gather any questions and concerns. So I'll start with some council goals, how those relate, provide a subject summary, get into the details of the update, provide a timeline, and then answer any questions you all have. So this also relates to our environmental sustainability and resiliency council goal, especially minimizing climate impacts while protecting vulnerable populations and planning for citywide resilience. So the NFIP, or the National Flood Insurance Program, is managed by FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And NFIP provides flood insurance to property owners, renters, and businesses, and having this coverage helps them recover when floodwaters recede. And the Department of Ecology helps jurisdictions adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations that mitigate flooding effects. And we're required to update this part of the code by the end of this year as well. And updating the code also aligns with our environmental element of the comprehensive plan. So this is our flood insurance rate map for the city of Mountlake Terrace in the turquoise. Mountlake Terrace only has Zone A areas of special flood hazard, and so these areas only have a 1% chance of flooding and a 26% chance of flooding over the life of a 30-year mortgage. So we are updating some definitions within this section. We're removing one definition that's no longer referenced in the proposed code, and then adding words and phrases as they are being added to the code. So the first update, and these updates I'll say are to align with the model ordinance for the state of Washington related to floodplain management. So our first one is under the administration section. So we want to clarify that in an application for a development permit, the information that they must provide should include proposed elevation of the lowest floor level in relation to mean sea level or average sea level. And then we're adding a requirement to provide an engineering analysis that indicates a no rise of the flood base elevation when development is proposed in a floodway. Within administration still, the duties and responsibilities of the floodplain administrator. So they have to review all permits to determine among what we already have. We're adding that the proposed development is not located in the floodway or meets no rise standards. And encroachments are prohibited unless otherwise proven to result in no increased flood levels through that engineering analysis. We're also adding that FEMA is notified when annexations occur within the special flood hazard area, and FEMA is notified of changes to base flood elevation. And just to remind you all, the floodplain administrator is our building official, Matthew Gissel. So more duties and responsibilities for the floodplain administrator are that they obtain and maintain different types of information. So we're clarifying that they must obtain records where the base flood elevation is provided through a flood insurance rate map, FIS flood insurance, trying to remember, flood insurance study, had to look at my notes, or as required by the code. And then also clarifying that as-built elevations are in relation to average sea level. And then we're adding that they obtain the certification that is required by no rise standards for floodway encroachments from those engineers that submit their engineering analysis. Also within their duties, we're removing changes to special flood areas. FEMA no longer requires that they maintain or report back to them any changes made in the special flood hazard areas. So we're removing that requirement. And then also in administration for review of building permits. So where the elevation data is not available, either through the flood insurance study, the flood insurance rate map, or another authoritative source, applications should be shall be reviewed to assure that the proposed construction is reasonably safe from flooding. And the way to test reasonableness is local judgment, including historical data, high water marks, photographs of past flooding where it's available. All right, so moving away from administration now into the construction provisions for flood hazard reduction. We're proposing that under utilities, adding water wells being located on high ground that is not in the floodway. And then for subdivision and development proposals, adding that where these proposals are greater than 50 lots or 5 acres, whichever is less, that the base flood elevation is part of the application. So specific standards for residential and non-residential construction, adding that where the base flood elevation has been determined or obtained, new construction and substantial improvement shall have the lowest floor, including the basement, elevated 1 foot or more above the base floor elevation or base flood elevation. Mechanical equipment and utilities shall be waterproof or elevated at least 1 foot above base flood elevation as well. And the illustration on the left demonstrates kind of what is being described here. Specific standards for non-residential construction is that if the base flood elevation cannot be obtained, structure's lowest floor must be 2 feet above the highest adjacent grade. Fully enclosed areas below the lowest floor are prohibited or shall be designed to automatically equalize hydrostatic flood forces on exterior walls by allowing entry and exit of floodways designed by a professional engineer or architect. Alternatively, they can propose engineered openings for the floodwaters to move through. And if the above is not met, the building must be structurally flood-proofed, and that's defined in the proposed code. And then insurance premiums are based on rates that are 1 foot below the flood-proofed level. And then specific standards for, this is for residential, we're adding that if buildings or manufactured homes are constructed or substantially improved within fully enclosed areas below the lowest floor, the areas can only be used for parking of vehicles, building access, or storage. We already completed our 60-day review for commerce and did our SEPA notice and comment period back in the summer for this one, and no comments have been received. All right, and now we have time for discussion and questions.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Has FEMA commented on this? I assume you've been working with them on this.
So not FEMA specifically. It went through the commerce review period, and Department of Ecology is the one that kind of administers the program and enforces the regulations and works with jurisdictions on behalf of FEMA. So I have not worked directly with FEMA, but I've worked really closely with Department of Ecology. All of these updates are things that they recommended to align with the model ordinance. So they support these recommendations. So in turn, I feel that FEMA would also support them.
Okay, great. And do we have any floodways in the city?
Zone A, I see. These
Is it
are
just in-
special flood hazards. So I believe these are the floodways, but I can clarify what's the floodway versus the areas around.
Okay, I guess it's going to be no, because I think floodways are zone AE, like you typically generated by a study that includes zone AE, which I'm a little surprised we don't have for Lake Ballinger after the Army Corps of Engineers sort of like completely dug up and rebuilt that whole area. But, you know, got the regulations we got, I guess. And then I'm curious, I'm guessing this doesn't really impact very many parcels in the city, but that would be kind of a cool bit of information to have, especially parcels that aren't parks. Like,
How many parcels are impacted?
yeah, and like kind of which they are. I'm guessing the neighborhood to the north of Lake Ballinger is most likely to be the one that's most heavily impacted, followed by some random parcels here and there on Hall Creek. And then I'm also curious if the city is tracking how well the flood zones map to the flood damage that we see, which FEMA might be able to provide some data on flood insurance claims that might help back that up. Or like, I know like 216th floods a lot, and you know there are jokes about Lake Embassy at 44th and I-5. But if we're tracking kind of where the flooding is actually occurring versus what's on the maps.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we are, but I can get back to you on that or how we would do that.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions? I'm not hearing or seeing any. I only have one, and I kind of brought it up at the last meeting with Christy. In case the, you know, since this is kind of through FEMA via the state organizations, we might be okay, but say the federal standards become more lax, we would probably still look to state guidance, and if the state says, no, we're not going that direction, we're going to keep the level that we have, or maybe increase the protections, we're going to follow the state. We're not going to necessarily be beholden to the weakening of the standards at the federal level if that were to occur.
Correct. Yeah, local government can always have more strict regulations than even the state, and the state can be more strict than the federal government. So if whatever regulations we adopt will be what our community is kind of beholden to.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, it looks like this one was a little shorter.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we're ready to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the director's report. But from my understanding, we don't have any, we don't have a director here, so probably
He's
no
not
report.
here. No report.
Okay, just double check and make sure there wasn't any random announcements. So we'll move on to item number 8, miscellaneous business by called planning commissioners. Anybody have any miscellaneous business? Absences? Vacations? Preemptive Mariner celebrations?
We'll dedicate the next meeting to that if that happens.
Hopefully, knock on wood. Okay, well, I guess with that, we'll go ahead and declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.